We are in Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14. We're going to be down about verse 32. We've been examining this particular material for a little while here. We're kind of in these last hours and last days of the relationship between Jesus and His disciples prior to His death, burial, and resurrection. We're getting some of those last moments in relationship to Him and His kind of His last messages prior to His death. We'll have some time after that, after His resurrection, as it relates to His communication to His disciples. But these are some pretty significant moments, and there's sadness in them, there's sorrow in them, there's ultimately going to be victory in them, there's appreciation on our part for what Jesus was willing to do in order to bring our redemption. There's a lot of emotional spectrums that you walk through when you examine these hours and days leading up to the crucifixion of our Savior. And so that's been our process over the last several classes, and we've been going a little slower in some ways in relationship to this particular chapter. But I think it's significant that we make sure we take plenty of time to analyze and appreciate everything that Jesus went through and has done. So we've had this process. We know that Judas is what? Yeah, he's already determined to betray Him. He had went to those chief priests and the scribes and the rulers and made an agreement that he would betray Him. He comes back and he's with them when they're at partaking of the Passover. While they're eating the Passover, Jesus implements or establishes what? The Lord's Supper, right? We often call it the Lord's Supper or His memorial. That way He would want to be remembered, His body and His blood that would be sacrificed on behalf of mankind. Sitting there, including Judas, and Jesus had told all of them what was going on among them. That there's a betrayer, right? There's a betrayer among you, and each of them came and said what? Lord, is it I? I'm going to talk about that I'm going to springboard out of it. I'm not really going to talk about it in our sermon. We're going to look at it anyway this morning. But each one comes, including who? Judas. Okay. And so we've been through all of that process. And again, Mark gives us kind of a condensed look at those scenarios and scenes. And so Jesus has now, in verse 32, gone to a place which was named Gethsemane. And He said to His disciples, "Sit ye here while I shall pray." And He taketh with Him Peter and James and John, and began to be sore amazed and to be very heavy. And so Jesus decides to head to Gethsemane, and He leaves the bulk of His disciples in one area, right? They get to that point, leaves them there, and then He takes Peter, James, and John a little further into Gethsemane with Him, and then He's going to leave them in a spot, and He's going to go a little further, just a stone's throw, one narrative tells us, away from where Jesus would be. If you were to look at modern-day Gethsemane, you would see something basically like this. Now, this is the basic region of Gethsemane and the area of this garden, if you will. Olive trees, obviously a predominant fixture in that particular area. The Mount of Olives just not far from that. And so you can see various depictions even in modern times as it relates to this area where Jesus went in order to offer His prayers before His Father. And so He finds this kind of private place, if you will. And what I've always been appreciative of, and fascinated is probably not the right word, but how impacting it should be to us that even God the Son took time to do what? To pray. Even God the Son, even deity walking among men, even God with us, saw the importance to communicate with His Father. And He saw it such an important thing that there were times where even though there were lots of very important work and aspects of things that He was fulfilling and purposes He needed to accomplish, there were moments where He would leave that and go up on a mountain or find some secluded place and get into prayer with His Father. And that should be great education for us. Sometimes we need to put away whatever it is that's going on in our life and just find a place somewhere by ourselves and communicate with the Father. And appreciate the beauty of that. Appreciate the honor that it is that we have the opportunity to even speak our thoughts before the Creator. But certainly learn from Jesus as He exemplifies the importance of prayer. And so Jesus says, my soul is exceeding sorrowful unto death. He sees it coming closer and closer. And tarry ye here and watch. And so, pretty simple commands, right? First he tells the initial disciples, sit ye here. Then he takes Peter, James, and John a little further, and he tells them, I'm sorrowful unto death. Tarry here. And what's the simple thought? And watch. Now, just pause for a moment. That's an interesting word, isn't it? Because what was kind of the main thrust of that description when he talked about, first he talked about the destruction of Jerusalem, and then he also answers that secondary question of when the end of all things would be. And what's kind of the catchword at the end of all that? Watch. The very thing that he had just educated them about concerning the coming of the destruction of Jerusalem, concerning the second coming of Jesus, the key thought in that was be prepared, be ready, be watchful. And so my point is simply this. We're not all that long from that educational moment. From those teachings that Jesus presented, we're just some few hours later, in many senses. From that moment, he sits these immediate disciples down, Peter, James, and John, and he just asks them simply, tarry here and watch. Not what? Not sleep. Tarry here and watch. Pretty simple request when you think about it. But have they had some pretty grueling days? Sure. Is it absolutely plausible that they're pretty tired? I don't think you can make any argument against that, right? I think that these are men who have been exhausted by the process by which they've been encountering, the travel in which they've been encountering, all the facets we can consider. But at the end of the moment, all that Jesus asked for them is to sit here and watch, especially concerning the fact that he's bearing the weight of what? His imminent death, right? Go ahead, Jim.
We're looking at right now the human side of Christ.
Yeah.
Because he's real, the human side would be, his soul would be, like I said, be distressed, heavy on him.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no doubt we forget sometimes that the Son of Man that Jesus is carries with him the same heaviness of these things as anybody else would in that regard.
To speak to that point, in this, you get that from his own words. I'm very heavy. He was burdened and weighted down. I heard someone say the weight of the world. You ever heard that phrase, the weight of the world's on my shoulders?
Yeah.
Well, it literally was that night with Jesus. If he failed, if he couldn't go through with it, everything that the Father planned and purposed from the beginning would have been lost.
Yeah.
There was no other hope.
Yeah. And you can't help but think, too, that he knows what he's about to go pray. And so he knows what's on his mind and what petition he's going to bring before the Father. And when we get there, you kind of add those two thoughts together. This is a heavy enough burden that he's going to ask God, is there any other way? Is there any other way?
Well, Brian, and another unique thing, which I think we tend to overlook across the board, is how God the Father has to feel knowing. I can't change anything. No matter what he prays, this has to happen. And God has to say no to his own son's prayer. Yeah. And, you think about that, just apply that from a parent standpoint today. We don't like as parents to say no. We know sometimes we have to. But in general, our answers, if we can make it work, are going to be okay.
Yeah.
But God knows he can't do that here. And no matter what Jesus prays to him or asks to have happen related to this, God the Father has to say no to his own son.
Yeah.
And in essence, as he says, forsake him. You know, and we tend to, I think, sometimes look at God as, how could you do that? How could God say no to this? How could God put him through this? But both God and Jesus knew what had to happen and what their roles had to be in that. And it couldn't be easy on either end.
Yeah, I think that as we see this conversation here in a moment, this prayer between from Jesus, I think we'll see that even, well, here in verse 36, I want to note something that'll show that even further. So Jesus goes a little further in verse 35, goes forward a little and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. Is it possible that this cup, this hour, this challenge could just pass by and that he not have to endure all the things that he's going to face? And notice then in Jesus' words, and he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible unto thee. Take away this cup from me, nevertheless not what I will, but what thou wilt. Now, just think about the sobering nature of that for a moment. Number one, I want you to know when he says Abba, Abba by definition is the first words formed on the lips of the child. And so it's an endearing term. We can understand God the Father from various aspects. We can say Father from an authoritarian aspect, right? Where you have to follow the authority and guides and instructions of that Father. But there's also a relationship where you can understand God the Father as Abba, Father, as a child would express towards their Father. This is the words of His only begotten Son. This is the child, if you will, imploring the Father to do something. And getting to your point, Randy, even a little heavier maybe even, Jesus looks to His Father and says, I know that all things are what? All things are possible. Just because it's possible for God to do something doesn't mean it's His will to be done. And that's a hard thing that Jesus is kind of, in a sense, appreciating further here. And it's something maybe that you and I have to kind of appreciate about the nature and character of God as well. Because we would just like it and assume it that you know, God, all things are possible, so if I ask it, He'll do it, right? And we have to appreciate that sometimes it doesn't fit within the scope and will of the Father. Even though it's absolutely possible for Him, doesn't mean it fits within His scope or His will. And also that in some senses that He understands how to allow for His will to process over time to benefit us in ways that we may not exactly appreciate or understand. We sometimes conclude that we've got a better path or a better understanding of what path I should be on. And we get confused or we get frustrated or even disappointed when God's responses don't match the path that I thought I wanted to be led to. But sometimes we've got to appreciate the fact that God's will is superior in understanding than ours. Abba, Father, all things are possible unto thee. Take away this cup from me. But nevertheless, what I love about Jesus' prayer here is He makes His request. He appeals to Him as child to Father. He appeals to Him in understanding the power and authority that He has to do anything that He chooses to do. And once He's expressed it, then He steps away from that and says, but not my will, but thine be done. Not what I will, but what thou wilt. And Jesus recognizes that this whole picture and plan and purpose is about a fulfillment of what was in the will and mindset of our Creator even before the foundations of the world. We'll learn out of the book of Acts. But it doesn't make it any less difficult. Though the plan may have been understood, and though the plan may have been appreciated, it doesn't make it any less difficult when here's Jesus, pouring His heart out to His Father. A Father who has every ability to fulfill His request, but then to also have a mindset that says, but whatever you will, that's what I'll fulfill.
Do we forget sometimes what Jesus did and how important it was. That's about, because he hadn't done it, he had no hope.
Yeah. Well, and let me throw one little piece of thought into that equation, Jim. Son of Man. So it's hard for us to grasp sometimes. Jesus is all man and all deity all the time while he walks on earth. And that's hard, right? That's hard for us. That's a hard concept to grasp. But so the deity within Jesus could have, on his own volition, walked away from this scene. I think that's evident when he's tempted of the devil in Matthew chapter 4. Because those temptations are no temptations at all if Jesus has an inability to react or respond to those things. And so here's what I appreciate. The deity side of Jesus could have kicked in at any point and said, I'm not doing it. And yet he's willing to accept the will of his Father over his own will and over his own thought processes. So he has power within himself, and yet he appeals to the Father's power if it's possible. I don't want to circumvent your plan and your will. If it is possible in your hands, is there a way for us to escape this? But nevertheless, not mine, but yours be done. What I appreciate, here's the lesson I'm trying to drive at. Sometimes we have power, ability, and all things necessary to do something. But does it fit the will of the Father? Jesus, if I understand his deity correct, had all ability within himself to make whatever choices and decisions he wanted to make. But he relinquishes that power and ability so that he could subject himself to the will of the Father. Sometimes we have to do the same thing. Sometimes we have to take our will and abilities and possibilities and all the things that we could potentially fulfill, measure them to what God wants from me, and say, not my will, but thine be done. Even when there's all the power in the world to accomplish those things.
It's difficult to look at this without seeing the ultimate end that we know. We have a full revelation here in front of us that, as you said, that ultimately there's going to be victory. And the reason I bring that up is because the motivation of all of this is love. The reason, there's no doubt that God the Father loved the Son. He was the beloved, in several scriptures. And that love for his Son, I don't want to say it's rival, but just as strong was his love for the human race. Yeah. And he offered his Son, and his Son ultimately willingly went to the cross, motivated by love for us. And that I don't know that we fully grasp the concept of love. I really don't. I don't think we have that. This is such a deep and incredible, and it's not emotion either. It's not like God is emotionally out of control. This is a willing choosing. I'm going to love you regardless of what you do, and here's how I love you. And it just, I'll let you speak.
Well, it's hard to, and you're right, because what happens, and maybe it's our misconception of how do you define love. That's a whole other thought within itself. But from our viewpoint sometimes, what God did was he for the moment set aside his love for his only begotten and extended it unto his creation. Because he's willing to say, okay, Son, I'm sorry. You're going to have to endure these things because I love my creation too. And they need this sacrifice. And that's a very compelling, should be to all of us, a very compelling aspect of how much does God really love me? Well, he not just sacrificed or allowed for his Son to be sacrificed, but he willingly, though all things were possible for him, he willingly set aside that for him in order to benefit us. And that should be a powerful message to us.
I think too, we have to realize Jesus was there in the very beginning. He was part of the plan from the word go. So it's not like this is something that's just happened and popped up in the last 3 years or the last 33 years. Jesus is known, God is known from the beginning, what the ultimate end was.
Yeah.
And this shows God's love for us. It shows His love for His Son by, saying no when He would want to say yes, but He knows He can't. It shows Jesus' love and respect for His Father by not being selfish and using His own power to make this go away. Yeah. And He submits to His Father's will. It shows His love for us by doing so. And then again, when you look at what He goes through, being beaten, being crucified, we don't read anything about Him using His power to make the pain go away. Yeah. He lives through the pain and agony of the crucifixion. And again, we tend to forget He had the power to not feel that. He could have easily said, go ahead, do whatever you want. Yeah. But He doesn't.
And well, let's contrast that for a minute then. So what you have in verses 35 and 36 is deity being selfless. God the Son selflessly says, not my will, but thine be done. God the Father selflessly says, it's possible for me to take my Son out of this equation, but I'm going to leave Him in it because I love mankind. A selfless act. And then He cometh and findeth them sleeping, and saith unto Peter, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldst not thou watch for 1 hour? Completely selfless acts of willing sacrifice, implemented or examined there in that prayer, to 3 of His closest companions who have selfishly chose to sleep rather than watch. It's an interesting contrast when you think about what's happening between Jesus and God, and then here's His disciples. And again, I wasn't there, obviously, and sometimes it's hard for us when you're reading it on the page. I sense emotion here from Jesus in these words. I don't see Jesus, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldst not thou? I don't see that, right? I see sleeping. You're sleeping. Couldn't you watch for 1 hour? You see a heart broken. Say, He's already got one that was sitting at His table that's going off to betray Him and lead Him into the hands of chief priests and scribes. He takes His closest companions with Him to the darkest moment. He's known all along this is coming. God knew all along this was coming. He's reached practically to the hour in which it's going to occur. He's in the darkest moment. Sorry, Skype keeps wanting to get away, go away. It keeps coming up. Anyone learn how to get rid of Skype, please let me know. I got to get rid of it because I never use it and it keeps wanting me to use it. Here's this dark, desperately sorrowful moment. And all He's asking for these companions is just to watch. Be there for Him. Be there for Him. And they come back and they're asleep. Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the what? The flesh is weak. You can have a willing mind all day long, but the flesh is going to start pounding you, He says. The flesh is going to start leading you in other directions. You can have a spirit about you that is fully interested in all things righteous and all things spiritual. You can have a willing mind, but you got to understand, He says, there's going to be all kinds of temptations that hit your flesh. You're going to have moments where you're tired. And when you're tired, you're going to be tempted. When you're hurting, you're going to be tempted. Think about what Jesus is about to endure, and yet He's going to have to resist the temptation to lash out, which we learn about in relationship to that, the servant that gets his ear knocked off. Jesus is going to have to resist the temptation to strike out towards those oppressors. I mean, think about the power that Jesus had. Could have reached back, grabbed the scourge, and turned it on those that were scourging him. The flesh is weak, he says. And so the temptations that flesh seek, the willing mind isn't going to be enough. The Spirit truly is ready. But are you really ready to commit all of yourselves to the purposes we have here? Watch ye and pray. In other words, while I was off praying to the Father, what you all should have been doing is not sleeping, but being watchful and prayerful for my return. So again he went away and prayed and did what? Spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, neither wist they what to answer him. First time you get caught, you're like, what? Sorry. Won't happen again, right? Won't happen again. I'm bright-eyed now. I'm awake. He leaves the second time, and he comes back. And this time, they don't even have a what? They don't even have a response. He just asked us to watch and pray. The second time, we fell asleep again. And then he cometh the third time, and saith unto them, Sleep on now, and take your rest. It is enough, the hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. You know, the difficulty of this in some ways is the fact that Jesus' disciples are going to face bigger challenges than being tired. They're going to have to face rulers that want them dead in their cities. They're going to face the Jewish leadership who is going to be emboldened to try to imprison them, have them killed, whatever they... You are going to face greater fleshly challenges than being tired, Jesus says. And it's kind of a wake-up call, if you will, no pun intended. It's kind of a moment where they have to come to realization that we chose. Remember, it was James and John who did what when it came with their mother? Yeah, they're the ones that came and requested positions of authority and power. And Jesus basically said to them what when they asked for that? Do you really want that? Do you really know what you're asking for? Do you really know what it's going to be like to be in a position that makes you a direct connect as leaders, if you will, in the cause and purposes that I have? Do you really understand what that's going to put you through? And now they've had 3 moments where they were simply asked to watch and pray. They can't even fight the physical temptation to want to go to sleep. Bigger things are coming. Now, fast forward into the history. Peter's got an issue coming, but move forward into the history of their work. I think it works for them. I think ultimately they realize this. They face tremendous challenges, and they're very emboldened at times to simply do exactly. Is it God that we should honor or man that we should honor? So they're learning from all this. But it's sorrowful for Jesus. To the point when he returns the third time, he's just like, go ahead and sleep. Take your rest now. The hour has come when I'll be delivered. So rise up, let us go. Lo, he that betrayeth me is at hand. Now, unless I'm mistaken, up until this moment, they don't know what? They don't know who that is. Jesus knows who that is. But they had yet to be able to figure this out. Now, the narrative doesn't give us any real indications about their reactions to that. But you can almost just put yourself in their shoes for a moment. As you leave that spot where you were with Jesus and you head over here, and here comes Judas with all the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And the moment that it clicks in your mind, who had been sitting at table with you for so long, who had the mindset of wanting to turn Jesus in to the chief rulers. And immediately while he tells them that, while he yet spake, cometh Judas, one of the 12, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. They assume there's going to be a what? They assume there's going to be. They don't bring just a couple of guys to take Jesus. The text says they bring a great multitude, and that multitude is what? Fully armed. Okay, they are armed. This multitude of people. Now I don't. Generally, when you see multitude, it just simply means it's a big crowd, one that you wouldn't necessarily try to do a head count for, right? A large number of people are with the scribes and the elders, and they are armed, assuming there's going to be a fight in order to be able to take Jesus. And he that betrayed him had given them a token, saying, "Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he. Take him and lead him away safely." Now that's another interesting facet, at least to me. Apparently, those who have come to take in Jesus don't necessarily know what? What he looks like or who he is. I want you to think about that. That means these men, these scribes and elders and chief priests, and you can only kind of imagine how they would be predominant in this multitude of folks that are coming. And they have made their judgments of Jesus based on what? Hearsay. I want you to think about that. It's obvious that they have never actually walked down and listened to Jesus actually speak about something. They've not gone and encountered Him in any kind of personal level. They have made all of their decisions about what they should do with Him based on what others have told them. So much so that they don't even know what He looks like. Now, we can make the argument, it's what? What time of day or night? It's night. And so you might be able to make the argument, well, it's nighttime, they want to make sure, but I think this is unfamiliarity. I believe they simply don't know. They've already determined ahead what Judas is going to do, the token, if you will, or his reaction when he gets there is already predetermined. Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he, take him and lead him away safely.
You think Judas actually thought they were going to do what they did? From what he said here?
I don't know. I don't know what Judas is thinking. Because that word, notice, he that betrayed him had given them so there was a prior conversation, saying, "Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he. Take him and lead him away safely." Well, if you would just turn him over to be crucified, why are you concerned about the manner in which they take him? I don't know whether Judas thinks, I don't know what he thinks. I'll be honest with you, I don't know. It's hard to get into his mindset. Right, does he, but why else would you have gone to the chief priests and scribes? Because their intent has been pretty clear. Anyway, it's just hard to read it. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure there's an idea here where they want to make sure that they can secure it. It's that safely part that confuses me. Knowing that crucifixion, and again, maybe Judas thinks that some other outcome is going to come. But anyway, it's just kind of an odd thing in the midst of it all. So as soon as he was come, he goeth straightway to him and saith, "Master, Master," and kissed him. And what a betrayal. Because not only has he turned him over into the hands of the chief priests and the scribes, but the manner in which he does it. He uses his proximity and closeness to Jesus, refers to him as Master. Worthy of being turned over to the chief priests and scribes, but yet also worthy. The hypocrisy in Judas is tremendous. And he kissed him, and they laid their hands on him and took him. And one of them that stood by drew a sword and smote a servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Now, if we read the other narratives, we know that was Peter. It was on the apostle side of that. It was Malchus was the servant, and we know that Jesus put the ear back on. Now, Jesus doesn't get into that specifically here, or the narrative does not, but I want you to just think about it for a minute. You just witnessed. Okay, maybe you hadn't encountered Jesus yet, right? You don't even know what He looks like. You have to have Judas come up, give Him a kiss, and signify to you which one of these men is actually Jesus that we need to lay hands on. You maybe have not personally experienced this yet, but you now just witnessed a man's ear cut off and it put back on it. No, I don't know about you, but I think I take 2 steps back. When I witness a man's ear cut off right in front of me and then put it right back on, I think I take 2 steps back. But they are so determined that he has to be removed and that he has to be put to death and that his influence, their desire for power and influence over the Jewish population was so strong that they would ignore a miracle of that sort performed right in front of them. And they still take Jesus. What's Jesus say to them when they come with all this power and swords and staves? Yeah. He says, He said unto them, Are you come out as against a thief? Am I some kind of criminal that you've had to bring all this power and these swords and staves to take me? Am I that big of a threat? Have I ever threatened any harm? Or I was daily with you in the temple teaching, and you took me not. But the Scriptures must be fulfilled. He says, I was with you daily in the daytime. I was in and out of Jerusalem for the last week. Back and forth, back and forth. That's what he says. I've been daily, back and forth, back and forth. You've had every opportunity to take me, but now you come in the middle of the night with swords or staves. This is how you come. If you can't approach something with honesty, then you have to have the cloak of what? The cloak of darkness. You have to have some shadow of darkness or something in order to cover up your dishonesty. They come and approach Jesus in the middle of the day when the people are around and about, and they begin to make accusation or they begin to try to take Him. It's not going to work. The people are too familiar at that stage with Jesus' work and the things that He had been fulfilling and doing. And Jesus just looks at them and says, You've come out here to take me like a criminal when you've had every opportunity. But the Scriptures must be fulfilled in the manner in which you would take me, in the manner in which I would be betrayed, in the manner in which all of these things would happen. And then what's the reaction? Verse 50. And they all forsook Him and fled. It's interesting. It appears that if they had gotten in a real fight, Peter was willing to what? He's willing to fight. Because he draws the sword first. Right? So if this had become a physical conflict, it appears at least that at least Peter was ready to have a physical conflict. But all of a sudden that dynamic changes. Jesus stops the physical conflict. He heals the man. And He approaches this whole scene from a different perspective. And now when it appears that, or not appears, but when it actually begins to be fulfilled, that Jesus willingly lets Himself go into their hands, His disciples begin to flee the scene. And we'll follow them and He through some even darker hours that are ahead in the narrative.
It's interesting that Peter had the strength and boldness to fight, but not the strength to humbly submit to death. Yeah. At least at this point.
Yeah.
Salvation. I think that's
Anything else that you would like to say?